This being said, a few words of introduction now. This webinar is the fourth one, as I said before, of a series. This is part of our campaign, communication campaign, Achieve Better Milk Together. At Vetoquinol, we aim at working hand in hand with our stakeholders to achieve more for vets and farmers, cows and consumers, which means healthier cows and herds, a better quality of life, and supporting sustainability of milk production. Beyond products, we're aiming at providing solutions, helping to solve your and your farmers' pains. In mastitis treatment with diagnostics and fit-for-purpose protocols, in mastitis prevention with products and management tools, and partnership in data management to help you provide attractive services. Our topic today, selective dry cow therapy, how can we make it happen? Selective treatment at dry-off has been promoted and implemented for about more than a decade now. And we see that in countries where regulation bodies have not established it as mandatory, there is still an important part of dairy cows that receive antibiotics at dry-off, whether they require it or not. Our speakers tonight, but I'll let them introduce themselves. Professor Sophie Peepers from M-Team at University of Ghent, researcher and teacher, passionate about mastitis and milk quality, bringing science into practice, turning knowledge into action. And Dr. Joep Driessen from Cow Signals, a company providing very practical trainings for farmers and vets, farm-oriented, fit in the boots, as we say in France. Now it's time to listen to Joep. So the floor is yours, Joep.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very excited to have all these vets from all over Europe again. So thank you very much for joining. Yeah, well, it's about udder health, as Stefan said, udder health signals, achieve selective therapy through dry-off management. So the next 20 minutes, I want to show you about dry-off management, how to actually manage it, how to get better results. And it's all about resistance in the cow. And I showed you this picture last time. So if you have cows leaking milk after dry off, you are in real trouble. And if you have cows leaking milk in general, you are in pretty much trouble as well. So what can we do to have better resistance and less leaking of milk? Well, what's the first thing to do is, of course, less milk pressure. So that's one of the things. But if there's milk leaking, there's no barrier anymore. So before we zoom into that, the cow signals concept is about feed, water, light, air, rest, and space. So if you want to have dry cows healthy, you have to really work on all six to keep them healthy. Health is in the middle. Health is the result of all the other six. So you can create healthy cows by doing the management and the housing right. If you want to dry off cows, there were usually 4 options. I think there's only 3 options left, and that is actually rule number 1. I was looking at the wrong screen. Rule number 1 for effective treatment, a management tool, is that you can have 1 man or 1 woman in 1 minute, 1 cow ready for treatment and treat her the first time right. So you don't want the cow to be half treated or with the wrong medicine or with only antibiotics and no painkillers. You have to really do everything right at the right time. But also very importantly, you have to work on the cow safe and fast. Because if you can select her and put her in a safe treatment box, it will be done, or in a milk parlor, of course. But after robots, we select specially into very good management or handling pens where you can safely work under the cow, a treatment box we create for that. So for drying off, we have 4 possibilities, basically, and that's actually well, what is your protocol? Antibiotics, teat sealer, antiprolactin, which is actually not very successful. It doesn't work anymore. It was used in dogs. It doesn't work very well in cows. And nothing is still done on the best farms in some countries, also smaller farms with 50 cows or less than 100 cows, sometimes can be successful with doing nothing. but that's only possible with excellent management and housing. So I learned a lot in the past years in Scandinavia how they were doing it. So it can be done. Some farmers in the Netherlands do it as well. But very likely it is antibiotics and teat sealer. But as we see in the Netherlands, what Stefan also said is that it's illegal to do it when the cow is healthy. So when the cow is healthy, no antibiotics are allowed. And we declare the cow healthy. This is research from Christian Scherpenzeel. He was doing a big research in Dutch data study. If we don't treat these cows, what's going to happen with them? So, and we came to the conclusion that it's not necessary to treat them with dry cow therapy antibiotics below 150,000 cells for first lactation cows, and 50,000 is the borderline in the last 3 milkings, the last 3 months before dry off, last 3 checkups. So we have to focus on very good housing, resistance of the cow, a healthy resistant cow, good housing and excellent ventilation. So think about fans in your dry cow shed with fresh air, especially when you have them on straw. And we see more and more farms in the Netherlands. The top end is housing them on a full straw yard, all the dry cows. It can be very successful, but you really need ventilation and airflow to keep the top layer of the straw dry. In 2015, we went down 50% in the antibiotic use. So it was a huge step that we came down in dry cow therapy. So 50% less antibiotic used in dairy cows in a 6-year program. And in 2015, where we were on 50% of the original what we were using. So at the moment, 50% of the cows doesn't get teat sealer, roughly, in the Netherlands. Doesn't get antibiotics. They do get teat sealers most of the time, but no antibiotics. One of the big things I already said in the beginning is actually that you want to have less liters in the udder. If you see all this milk here, that all has to be resorbed by the udder. So it's a lot of work for the cow to get it back. After you put a plug in here, antibiotics, and you put a plug in here of teat sealer, then you have to resorb all this milk. So if you are below 12 liters, it's excellent. If you are below 15 liters, 6 weeks dry period is enough to create the healing process of the udder. Some farms don't do dry cow therapy, very few, as only 1% in the Netherlands of the farms, or even less. They don't do any dry periods, so they continuously milk the cows, which is another strategy, but that's not for the mainstream. It doesn't seem the most successful program, although the 3 farms that's still doing it from the 18 test farms, they are very successful with it. But let's say 6 weeks dry period, but then you need to have a dry off group. And a dry off group from my 30 farmers here in the valley, in the dairy valley of Maas en Waal, where I work with, I think probably 25 are doing it. So they take the extra effort to dry off the cows. So what do? Well, of course, they stop concentrate, especially when it's in the robot or in the milk powder, no more concentrate. And they feed the first dry cow ration. What you see here is dry cow ration. It's far off dry cow ration, which is very low in energy. They still give plenty of water, and the most of them are do 2 times per day milking. But actually, we see also farmers that are very successful with 1 time per day milking, and some even skip 1 milking, 1 day in between that, in a period of 5-6 days. So they drop the milk normally with feeding less, and then the milk drops already below 15 liters. And that's normally enough, but sometimes they also do less milkings, or only once a day milking. It's all possible. They're all very successful in what they do, but what is the best? It depends very much on your housing and on the ease and the stress levels on your farm. So you have to decide what your success step plan is. Yeah, and that's what you have to discuss with the farmers, of course. So if you are a vet and advisor, which most of you are, I think this would be a very good idea to take care of. So we're working on the resistance. So how do we get better resistance? That's actually all the things that we discussed already. And then these five things. How can we work on resistance? I see that we already have almost 200 people listening. So I'm very excited, guys, that you all join us again for this webinar. And there's 2 more coming. So every time we do a little bit of the udder health management. And if you want to see the full program, we have also udder health video learning for this subject, but just join the next 2 trainings. I'm very happy to tell you more about it. So if you want to keep them healthy, how do you get the high resistance? By health, by feed, by rest, by barriers in the udder, and maybe with specific antibodies if you start vaccinating. So these are all options. So how do you keep them healthy? Look at those cows, shiny, beautiful shape of udder, no damage of the anywhere. So extremely healthy cows. Every cow in this herd is healthy and shiny, and that's what I like to see. And I normally see at least half of the cows which having a very dull skin, not like these very shiny, happy cows. So good health is actually the absence of lameness, wounds, acidosis, uterine infection, BVD, IBR, and other diseases. So no more disease. And the biggest one is probably the lameness, because lameness is killing the cow. And we have a whole training on hoof signals. And the question is, why do cows get lame? I like you to think about it. I have a 3S model, 3 S's for lameness. And what are these 3 S words for lameness? I like you to fill them in by yourself. So take a pen and a paper and write down 3 S words here in English or in Dutch. They can also work in Dutch, but in English is probably better. So the 3 S words for lameness, well, you see little wounds. I let you think a little moment. We see little wounds here. We see some scratches here and here. But the big thing is actually dirt on the legs everywhere. And the big thing is this hoof here in a very awkward position. And also this hoof is not in a very good position. And very likely there's infection or pressure lameness. So that's also the answer of the 3S model. It's actually number 1, standing, and number 2, where you can see it here. I'm not supposed to say shit anymore, so I call it slurry. Actually, slurry is also a better word, because slurry, should it be double R, Sophia? No, I think 1 R will be enough. Slurry is actually the stuff from manure and urine together, and that has a direct impact on the skin of the cow. So lameness is like killing the cow, and we see this happening everywhere in the world, and it's a big, big, big bummer for cows. So the last one, S, is stress. How do you move cows? If you move cows with too much stress, and they step on balls and they step on edges, and they damage their hooves even more. So less standing, that means better beds here, less slurry, after cleaning, more drop-offs, and less stress. So you have to do a course in stress-free stockmanship. And the answers are very simple. The answers are 3 R's, R, R, R. It's my triple S on my triple R model. R means resting time, plus rubber where they stand. They shouldn't stand. Standing is not the biggest problem. Standing on concrete is the biggest problem. So no more concrete. And that's why you can put rubber behind the feed fence. The slurry is regular cleaning, okay? And the stress is rest, take it easy, and it's quiet cow stockmanship. So the other question is, well, what are you going to do when they're lame? Well, we're not going to talk about that today, but recognize the manure on these cows and recognize the Mortellaro disease, the DD, and also the very brand new, very aggressive, painful infection on these cows. And you can only cure this by, well, of course, with food baths, but the first thing is less standing on concrete and less manure on the cows. But I'm so keen on this manure thing because it's also causing a lot of mastitis. So if you think about it, why do cows with closed flooring systems like here have more mastitis? Because of the floor, because the manure is not going quick enough down, and it's always a manure pool. And that's probably the main reason why England has 2 times more mastitis as the rest of Europe, where they have slatted floors. But of course, many farms have slatted floors or closed floors in every country. But in generally, we see in England that there's a higher level of mastitis for several reasons. But one of them is closed floors and lack of cleaning. Only 2 cleanings per day. So that's why we end up quite high in mastitis levels in the United Kingdom, but you can also fill in all kind of other countries in the world. But in Europe, if I compare Europe, Holland and Belgium are doing pretty well. There's quite a bit of slatted floors as well, and they have a lot of robot cleanings, high intensive farms with high money input and good floor cleaning. So that's one of the success factors. And what is it in your country or your practice? If you check all your farmers, what are your farmers doing at the moment? How many mastitis do you have per year? That's an interesting figure. The best farms are below 5%, and my top farmers only have 1 cow out of 140 cows. So it can be even less than 1%. Why do cows get thick hocks? Well, it's the same thing. It's about the bedding. The bed is not soft enough, and if there's not soft enough beds, they get lame and they get also thick hock damage. And there's a small feeding factor involved in acidosis, which is also having a direct effect on the mastitis, the acidosis levels, but also on the hocks. But the main cause of this disease is actually laying down on a mattress, which is too hard. Any mat is actually too hard, so you need a soft bed to cure thick hocks. And you need head space that it can stand up easily. What do you see on this one? Also 2 interesting wounds. I like you to look at the details. You see an open wound here, and you see shiny metal. Shiny cows is good, shiny metal is bad. So very many dry cows are housed in a box where they cannot stretch the head, because that's one dead end corner of the barn with a big wall in front of the head, so the cows can't stand up. If they can't stand up, they have serious wounds and they have less feed intake. So cows have to be really easy to move around. So about feed intake, the next point, shiny cows, when they eat to the max, and every cow needs a feed space, which is in the field, no problem. But if you look at the barn, it's often a problem. It's often not fresh. It's often not easily accessible. Walls are too high. Selection, what they do, these cows. So then we're going to check the rumen score and the body condition score, because what are they doing? And here we see 2 empty rumens. There's another empty belly on this cow. And this one is extremely fat and round. And this one is okay. And this one is even a bit more skinny. So you see that they also need 75, it should be 85 centimeters for dry cows, okay? This is for the average cow. So dry cows, and you can see it on this cow. This cow is probably 1.5 meters wide. These cows are huge if you measure them. So average, we need at least 85 centimeters feed space, and Nina von Keyserling, British Columbia, they already claim 90 centimeters per cow. So all about feed intake is all about management. And then we have the subclinical ketosis. How much more risk for cell count and clinical mastitis? Well, a lot. And this is actually 50% more cell count risk and 50% more clinical mastitis risk. So you have to also prevent subclinical ketosis by making the cow eat. So how can you make her eat? You can't push it in the mouth. It's not going to work. Yeah, you can lead a horse to the water, but you can't make her drink. And the same way, you can lead a cow to the feed, but you can't make her eat. So a new expression I just made up. So always tasty food, no food selection, no stress. And this one is quite interesting, the calf in the feed, because if you put the baby here after calving, it smells like the baby and she loves to eat it. And clean water, moving space, soft beds and floors, fresh air, and vitamin L. And that you cannot buy vitamin L. It's actually an effort of the farmer. It's love. Vitamin L is tender love and care, or tender loving care. You have to walk by this cow and push the feed 8 times a day. You say, hey baby, how are you doing this morning? And then she will eat 8 times a day and she will never get sick anymore. So put a little bit of vitamin L in this cow and she'll be very quickly filling up her rumen. And this is Ari, one of my top farmers here in the Netherlands, doing a great job. He has a very good stress-free calving line, and then he doubled it and he doubled it again. So he knows what to do to have a stress-free calving line. I explained this the last time already. If you want to see more of this, come to the Netherlands. So we have the ideal barn where we can also easily separate cows for a dry off group. So this is typically where we put the cows for dry off. So we can drop the milk from sometimes even 30 liters or more. We drop it into 12 liters. That's what we really like to have. And then after 5 days, they can go to the dry cow group where they also have a walkout. And that's how we organize new barns, that dry cows can have also exercise because they're a lot more healthy. So the cuddle box, I think you've seen it before, the Cow Sickles cuddle box. We won an award on Eurotier a few years ago. And it's really good that you milk the cow when the baby the baby's in front of the mother and give her the colostrum within a few minutes after calving. And that is the cuddle box principle, the cow signals cuddle box principle, where you have an easy set where the cow is licking the baby and eating a meal. And this is actually giving you 50% less disease on cows and calves. Amazing success story, guys, if you start doing this cuddle box. And I like you to get farmers to do it and send me on cowsignals.com some pictures from your country, because if you want to brand this worldwide, every farmer should start with a cow signals cuddle box, because it saves disease in fresh cows and fresh heifers. Always give them the baby the 4 liters colostrum from the mother. So one more thing on feed intake is the body check. This one is a bit low, maybe 2+, 2.5 maybe. It's just a bit on the low end, this cow, not good enough. What about these two? What number do you give them? The black one and the red one? Well, it's 2 from too skinny, and it's 4 from too fat. So it's that you want to have cows with 3, 3.5 right in the middle here. And like this, roughly 3.5 is perfect. A last thing on feed is actually a small thing. It's like minerals. How many minerals do you feed? And this is a job for the vet to check blood samples and find out if we're not overfeeding minerals, because that often happens because there's already a lot of minerals sometimes in concentrate, and sometimes they give too much minerals. So find out if it's not too much or not too little, and you can check it by urine or by blood samples. Then the rest, and we talked about it already. Did you see this here? This happy lines. This is the happy lines on the cows here. So happy cows have happy lines, and that's because they are so happy they can rest all day and they can eat a lot, and then they can be shiny and happy. And they need a big, dry, clean straw pack. And the first place for a fan is actually here, that you always have a dry straw pack. Also, if you don't fill it in today with fresh straw, you should fill it in daily with straw. And you should put a fan on it. Well, the last thing to understand is the barrier on the udder. And I know you have been advising this a lot to your farmers, but you can't say it often enough. I see there's already some questions coming in. Feel free to type in some questions, guys. And we come back to that in the last 20 minutes. So leaking, there's no barrier, and there's a lot of manure on these hoofs, and it's a high risk zone. There's no bedding in this cubicle. So what do? More bedding and dipping. So the two things to have the barrier and have the risk less is very clean straw and dipping of the dry cows. Quite a few farmers with cell count, we start dipping the dry cows just to make sure that there's an extra outside barrier. And also we have, of course, the inside barrier there in the dry cows. But on the end of lactation, on the end of dry period, they start leaking milk sometimes, and the teat ends are opening. So this is the door here, and the door should not be open. So the door can be easily damaged by farmers with their injections, or even by vets, by teat cups where they are too narrow or too hard, and they're damaging during the milk process, or blind milking, flies, and also calves suckling each other. So there's a lot of damaging done on this door. The door should not be open. So how can we close the door? Well, over milking really doesn't help, and robots have less risk of over milking because they stop the milking per quarter. But in many milk parlors, you see serious damage on the front teeth often, where they are dry sucking on these teat ends, and you see 2.5 times more risk for mastitis if you have this over milking. So another thing that you don't want to do. And then the dry off group go below 10 liters. We say less than 10 liters of milk will be ideal. 12 is still okay, and 15 is actually the maximum. Otherwise, you'd rather keep them one more day separate in a separate milking process. Interestingly, we see 50% open teat ends. 50% if your milk flow is above 21 at dry off. So half the cows have open teat ends. If you go below 21 kilos, you are ending up with 20. And I like to ask Sophie a question for the after discussion. If we go below 12, would it go down to 10 or less? That's a big question. I don't know. I don't have figures of that, but that might be an interesting question. The less liters, the less pressure. I would say the less leaking, and the more teats will be closed. At least the difference between 50 and 20 is already huge, and you drop the risk a lot by having a dry off group. And making a dry off group is time, and it's really bad news for farmers because it's extra work. But still, 25 of my 30 farmers here in the region do it because they see the benefits of it. And there's always more chance for mastitis when cows start leaking. So trying to stop the leaking by stop the milk pressure. So that's what you can do. And then the dry off group behind the robots. And the last one is antibodies. And then it's time for Sophie. Antibodies is actually vaccination. You all know about this. And this is a different subject. But yes, we can vaccinate cows to have more specific resistance. So think about feed, water, light, air, rest, and space that you really should solve in every cow, every young stock, every dry cow. Every cow needs all the 6 freedoms of the pasture also in the barn. And if you can give it to the cows, they will not get sick. If you want to know anything more, please send me an email on info@cowsignals.com or find me on social media and share a picture of some of your customers with a cuddle box. I like to see the first cuddle box from Romania and all over the countries in Europe, because I think we should start this movement in every country in Europe to start with. Thank you very much. Sophie, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Job. Very interesting again. And now time to switch to Sophie's presentation. Here we are. The floor is yours, Sophie.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Joep, for the interesting presentation. So how to implement now selective dry cow therapy in practice? Well, I want to start with what is selective dry cow therapy? Why do we want to change it? Why do we want to apply it? And then also some precautions and prerequisites to make it as successful as possible. Now, what is selective dry cow therapy? It's not so difficult to understand. We can do it at the cow level, we can do it at quarter level, but anyway, it means cows and quarters with an intramammary infection at the end of lactation or dried off with long-acting antimicrobials, and cows and quarters without an intramammary infection at the end of lactation or dried off without long-acting antimicrobials. So just like Joep said, if a cow is infected, then she will receive antibiotics. If she's not infected, then there is no need for antibiotics. Now, how do we select those cows? Well, that can be done via bacteriological culturing, or other methods can be used to identify the presence of mastitis causing pathogens, but it's not always needed. You can also do it based on the cell count. As the cell count is an indicator of infection, you can just use the cell count. And then the question is, of course, what is now a cell count? What is the threshold that we can use? Well, there is a consensus that we need to apply selective dry cow therapy, but there is no consensus about the threshold that we need to use to distinguish infected from non-infected cows. So here you can see some examples. In the United States, for example, here, they use 200,000 cells per ml. So cows that have less than 200,000 cells per ml at all test days, so throughout lactation, and less than 2 cases of clinical mastitis during whole lactation are seen as non-infected and do not receive antibiotics. At least that's the recommendation. In the United Kingdom, it's also what we use in Belgium, cell count below 200,000 cells per ml as well, but only the last 3 test days before dry off are taken into account. And also no clinical mastitis in that same period of more or less 90 days. If that is true, then cows will not receive antibiotics. The Netherlands is what Joep already explained, with the 150,000 cells per ml for the heifers and the 50,000 cells per ml for the adult cows, and only the last test day is used. And then in New Zealand, they are even more strict, because for the heifers they use 120,000 cells per ml, and for the older cows 150,000 cells per ml, but also all tests during lactation. So a cow that has one test above 150,000 cells per ml in that lactation, she will still receive antibiotics. So there is a lot of different possibilities. Now, why do we apply selective dry cow therapy? There is only one good reason. The only reason is that we want to lower the use of antibiotics on dairy farms. And these are results of Belgium, of Marina Stevens, where we investigated, where we quantified the use of antibiotics on dairy farms, but the same results can be generated or exist from the Netherlands, in Germany, in France. So everywhere we come to the same conclusion: most antibiotics on a dairy farm are used for the prevention and treatment of mastitis. And as you can see, quite a lot as intramammary injector to treat clinical and subclinical mastitis, but also almost 35% used to dry off cows. So if we move from blanket dry cow therapy, where all cows receive antibiotics at dry off, to selective dry cow therapy, then we will see a reduction in antimicrobial use on the dairy farm. There is no doubt about that. So if we switch to selective dry cow therapy, will we accomplish our mission? Yes, we will, without doubt. On every farm, if they switch to selective dry cow therapy, there is a reduction in antimicrobial use because quite some antibiotics are now used to dry off cows. Now, what is then the best cell count threshold? And you see worldwide that different thresholds are used. Well, there is no best cell count threshold, but there is one general rule. The higher you put your threshold, for example, at 500,000 cells per mil, the higher the reduction in the use of antibiotics, because the higher the threshold, the more cows that can be dried off without antibiotics. But the lower the risk of falsely drying off a non-infected cow with antibiotics. So there will be quite some cows that can be dried off without antibiotics. But of course, now and then, if you put, for example, your threshold at 500,000 cells per mil, well, of course, the risk that a cow with a cell count below 500,000 cells per mil is infected and will not receive antibiotics is, of course, increased. The opposite is true if we go for a lower threshold. If you use a lower threshold, well, then, of course, less cows will be dried off without antibiotics. That means that we have a lower reduction in the use of antibiotics. We have a higher risk that a non-infected cow will still receive antibiotics. If you put, for example, a threshold of 50,000 cells per mil, well, a cow with 100,000 cells per mil will receive antibiotics. Of course, there is quite a high chance that a cow with 100,000 cells per mil is not infected. On the other hand, the risk for the farmer is limited because we have a lower risk that an infected cow will be dried off without antibiotics. So it's always a balance. What is the risk you want to take? The risk that an infected cow does not receive antibiotics, and how much decrease do you want to see in the antibiotic use? Now, just to give you an example, if they apply these algorithms on 58 US herds in the United States, then you can see what is the percentage of cows that will receive antibiotics. Now, if they use the algorithm in the United States, so less than 200,000 cells per mil at all test days and less than 2 cases of clinical mastitis, then 50% of the cows in those 58 herds will be seen as high risk and will receive antibiotics. But we have seen in the United Kingdom that we also work with 200,000 cells per ml, but only the last 3 test days. Well, then, if we apply this algorithm to the same cows of those same herds, then only 31% of the cows will be seen as high risk and will receive antibiotics. Now, if you go to New Zealand and we apply these guidelines, the very strict ones, all test days below 120,000 cells per ml for the first lactating animals, below 150 for the older cows, and no clinical mastitis in lactation, then you see that 63% of the cows will receive antibiotics because they will be seen as high risk. So just using the same cows, same herds, we have almost double number of cows in New Zealand that will still receive antibiotics compared to, for example, United Kingdom. Now, if we use an example from the study that we conducted, dairy farms with a cell count below 250,000 cells per mil, so bulk milk somatic cell count, and we applied the threshold of less than 200,000 cells per mil in the last 3 test days before dry off, then we have seen that 90% of the cows that will not receive antibiotics were truly not infected. Of course, this is a high proportion, but it also means that still 10% of the cows did not receive antibiotics, while in reality they were infected. Of course, that does not mean that those cows will not cure. There is also something like spontaneous cure, but of course, you have a lower chance that they will cure if they do not receive antibiotics. On the other hand, we can say, oh, we don't have preventive use of antibiotics anymore. That's not true, because only 30% of the cows that will receive antibiotics were truly infected. So still 70% of the cows that received antibiotics were actually in reality not infected. So even if we switch to selective dry cow therapy, we will still use a lot of antibiotics, even in healthy, non-infected animals. Now you see that it all starts what happens at the herd level, of course. If we divide here herds in low herd milk somatic cell count farms, and then we have the high herd milk somatic cell count farms, then you see that the lower the cell count at the herd level, the more cows that can be dried off without antibiotics. So here on this farm, for example, we see that over 70% of the cows could be dried off without antibiotics. If you go a little bit to the high herd milk somatic cell count farms, then you see that in some farms it's even less than 10% of the cows that can be dried off without antibiotics. So it all starts with having a good udder health, and then we can dry off a lot of cows with antibiotics and also with a minimum of risks. Now, some precautions and prerequisites that you need to take into account. We will definitely reduce antibiotic use if we switch to selective dry cow therapy, but whether or not it will be without negative consequences depends on quite some factors. Also, the factors that Joep explained in his presentation. So we can always switch to selective dry cow therapy, but switching to selective dry cow therapy without negative consequences, yes, but. We need to know why dry period is so important. In dry period, we have the cure of existing infections. Cows that are infected that dry off can cure in dry period. Partly spontaneous cure, partly because we give antibiotics. But of course, we also have a cure of new infections that develop during dry period if we use antibiotics. Now, if we switch to selective dry cow therapy, we do not expect a change in the cure of existing infections, because cows that are infected will still receive antibiotics. But we do expect here an increase in the new infections over dry period, because the non-infected cows will not be treated with antibiotics. So that means that if they develop a new infection in dry period, that they will keep on being infected until calving. Some of them will cure, but we will have a higher new infection rate over dry period. So this is an extremely important indicator to take into account what happens with the new infection rate over dry period. Now that's why in Belgium also that we say, okay, selective dry cow therapy, very good, but not on farms with Staph aureus problems or Streptococcus agalactiae problems at the herd level. Let's first try to control that situation, improve udder health, and then we can maybe move to selective dry cow therapy. And if selective dry cow therapy is mandatory even on farms with a poor udder health today, and we know some dairy companies, they really want to apply selective dry cow therapy or want farmers to apply selective dry cow therapy, then my recommendation is to put the threshold as low as possible, for example, at 50,000 cells per mil. And then, of course, not a lot of cows will be dried off without antibiotics, and the risks are, of course, limited. That does not mean that it needs to stay like that, but that gives you some time to improve udder health at the herd level. And when that is improved, then you can increase the threshold to, for example, 200,000 cells per mil. Reduce the risk of new intramammary infections over dry period. I will not go in detail because that is what Joep has discussed. What are the risk factors? Well, you see there the risk factors. It's hygiene in the housing, comfort, housing, teeth disinfection when they apply and insert tubes, very important. Use of an external or internal teeth sealant. The milk production lower than 15 kilograms and even lower than 12 kilograms in the last 24 hours. And then vaccination to boost the immunity of the cows. So I also advise everybody to just go on farm before switching to selective dry cow therapy and to take the opportunity to evaluate the mastitis management, even milking technique, milking machine, lactating cows, and to see how well is the farm scoring when it comes to mastitis management, just to see if there are any risks present today and to reduce the risk of negative consequences when they switch to selective dry cow therapy. Now, the use of an internal teeth sealant, we have a great example from our Dutch colleagues. The first study they applied, they did not use internal teeth sealant. So 2/4 in low somatic cell count cows were still receiving antibiotics. 2/4 were not protected, no antibiotics, no internal teeth sealant, no external teeth sealant. The good news is that there was a total reduction in antibiotics of 85%. But the less good news is that cows that were not, or quarters that were not treated, had 2 times higher risk of clinical mastitis in the first 2 weeks after calving, and also a 2 times higher risk of a cell count above 200,000 cells per mil. So it's so important that if we don't use antibiotics, that we reduce the risk of new infections in dry period by having a good dry cow management, but also by protecting the quarters and cows with an internal teeth sealant. So what then about economics? Is it an economic benefit? Well, yes. In general, they see that selective dry cow therapy is economically more beneficial than blanket dry cow therapy. But they also see that the economic benefit will also depend at the herd level other health status. So on farms with a lower incidence of clinical mastitis and a lower bulk tank milk somatic cell count, there they see that selective dry cow therapy is more beneficial than on other farms. And also what is important to mention to our dairy producers is that the economic impact of improving udder health on a farm, both incidence of clinical mastitis and bulk milk somatic cell count, is much bigger than the effect of the dry cow therapy. So I know that quite some farmers are a bit afraid of switching to selective dry cow therapy. They are afraid of the economic consequences. But if they do not have a good udder health today, the economic consequences are there as well. It's even more important to have a good udder health if you want to have a high profitability on your farm. That impact is much more important than what kind of dry cow strategy you are applying. So some take-home messages. Selective dry cow therapy is the new way of drying off cows. There is no other way. It's the future, and it's actually already a bit the past as well. Like Stefan said, 10 years, decade, we are using, or we should go for selective dry cow therapy. There is the new European legislation that says we cannot use antibiotics as preventive measure. That's not possible anymore. So it's the new way of drying off cows. It will definitely reduce the use of antibiotics, but we need to be careful. It can be applied without negative consequences for the cow's future performances. But then it's important that we have a good udder health at the herd level. So try to improve the udder health at the herd level, less clinical mastitis, lower somatic cell count. That will also increase the profitability of the farm, which is also important. Improve dry cow management with measures that Joep discussed in his presentation, and definitely protect the quarters and cows against new infections if they do not get antibiotics by the use of internal teeth sealants. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, we are open to answer them.
Yes, there are questions. So some of them have already been answered. So the first one was about genetic, and I think it was about resistance from Joep's presentation. Does genetic matter for resistance?
Well, it's a good question for me and maybe for Sophie as well. I think yes, you can breed on everything, so also on general resistance, also on udder depth and fast milking or slow milking, long or small teats. There's many things you can do on genetics. And people normally look for genetics for like good legs and good udders. So if you select on good udders and on longevity, you also select for better udder health. Anything to add, Sophie?
No, I'm just that immunity is extremely important, although it's not easy to quantify. But even on farms with huge problems of mastitis, not all cows get mastitis. So that just shows us that there is it. They are all exposed to the same management, the same pathogens, and still there are cows that do not get mastitis. So that means that the cow plays an important role, and immunity and resistance are very important. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There were two questions about vitamin L, of course. It raises questions, and I understood, and you answered you that L was for love.
Yeah, very good. It's I learned this from Professor Arie Brandt. He said you have to give them vitamin L, love and attention. Arie Brandt, he just he died this year, and he was a very old crocodile doing a great job in dairy management, and he was my professor in vet school. And he said, look at the farmer, look at his wife, look at the cow, and look at the data, look at the farm. You have to look at everything, but the most important thing, take care of that fresh mother. Give her just a little bit extra feed, and every time you walk by, you say, "Hey, baby, how are you doing?" And you just shovel the feed into her, in front of her face, and you call her, and then she will get curious, and she will get up, and she get an extra meal. So love and attention is a really big thing, and it starts, of course, with a cuddle box. We mentioned it, the cuddle box, because it's about a very good contact, like cuddling, like hugging, like mother and baby having a great start. And the smell of the baby on that food, that's another big success factor. If you don't do the cuddle box principle, the cow will go back to the straw yard, to the corner, where she sniffs her baby. Hey, my baby was here. And then she starts eating the straw that was in that corner, because it smells after the baby. And that's what we were using now in the cuddle box principle. That idea from Arie Brandt, and the idea from the farms I was working with, the Thai stall farmers, where they put the baby on the feed. I think, hey, why are we not doing this in free stalls? Because it's one of the most natural things we can do to improve feed intake. And vitamin L is just an extra thing to think about. Always think about the love.
So there was another question from Wolfgang. What's the cause of dusty cows? Acidosis, ketosis?
Yeah, good question. Everything like dusty cows is, well, if you have very dusty bedding, you also have very dusty cows. If you have a lot of fine sawdust or very dried green bedding. But actually, the shiny cow with the happy lines that I showed you is when, this was also a sawdust barn, but you get happy lines when the skin and the hair is very smooth. And you only see this in very well fed animals. So the biggest reason for non-shiny cows, dusty and dull cows, is actually lameness and not eating enough. And if I come in a barn, very often I look to the left and I see the dry cows and think, wow, happy cows. They look shiny, happy lines. Then I turn my head to the major herd and I see at least 50% no happy lines, dull, 1/4 has an empty rumen. So it has a direct relation with lameness and not eating enough and not drinking enough. And these three go together. So these cows come out very dull, and they are a first signal that they just don't get what they need.
Okay, thank you. There was a question from Joel in Dutch, and you answered, so but I can't understand the question myself.
What was the question? I have to think about. I answered it already, eh? It was the question, why should you dip the cows and how often? That's a more question for Sophia. I know some of my farmers, Sophia, I started doing it after the vet was promoting it. They say, well, if you do it for the last 2 weeks, when you move your cow to the close-up group, that is the highest risk, or 10 days even, but the highest risk is the last 10 days, 14 days. So they do in the morning feeding, they all lock them in and they all dip them. It's quite risky with heifers. You're just under these cows, but be careful. Teach farmers how to do to it because they're used to milking cows, but they're not used to dipping cows when they're standing on a feed fence. And you have to, some people do it from the back, and some people have a longer tool where they can do it, but it's the most people use this small dipping tool, and they just go under these cows. But I always want to go from the front side, put my hand on the cow that she first sees me from the left side, and then I start dipping the 4 teats. It's doable, but it's also a bit risky. But some farmers say, hey, it's a very small thing to do, and it really drops my cell count. What do you think, Sophie?
Yes, indeed. And 2 weeks is a good way of working. But in some countries, they do not dip and they spray, and then you can use a longer tool and a longer device, and it's also less scary. You can keep more distance, and you can do it in a proper way. But it's effective, yes, definitely.
And one thing we didn't talk about was burning udder hair. I know robot farms doing it every 6 weeks, burning the udder hair with a flame. It was also in the news in Belgium that it was like a horrible thing, a flame under a cow. Like welfare parties were very much against it, but actually it's the fastest way in clipping hair from the udder with a quick flame. But you can only do it when you lock in all the cows. And it was one farmer, farmhand was doing it in between free walking cows. I said, oh my God, what's happening here? And he was actually said, yeah, the farmer told me to do it. It was a trainee, and he was working with a flame between the cows, scaring the cows. But if they're locked in very well, you can flame them easily, and then you can also spray them afterwards. That'd be a very good tool to do, because when you flame the udder hair, you have less attached dirt on the udder, and that's also important for robot milking, that the laser can find the teats. So that's why they do it a lot more often actually. But some farmers also do it with a machine, clipping the hair at dry off, which is also a very good step. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Poland. Sylvia is asking how many cuddle box for a herd of 400 cows would you recommend?
Yeah, only one, because you never have more than 1 cow per day calving on a 400 cow dairy. So you only need one place. You only have to put them in for 1 hour. So it's a very simple management tool that you make a little box close to where the cows are calving. So in the dry cow straw pen, in one of the corners, you make a very simple swing gate where you can catch a cow, a headlock, and maybe a mobile cuddle box. We also have some wheelie types and easy to move boxes, but they have to be easy to clean. And the one I showed you was the prototype, but we have like 20 more. If you send me an email, we can send you the white paper on the cuddle box, which is amazingly interesting for more details. So, but you needed only one. If you there's one company in Holland selling them, but you can also design them yourself. It's the idea of the cuddle box is just make sure you have the baby in front of the mother, and you put feet on top of that baby that the cow is eating and stimulating and licking the baby at the same time.
Okay, thanks, Hugh. Another question from Christoph. Are there specific pathogens that cause more problems in dry cow therapy versus in lactation? Sophie, maybe?
Yes, not more, but yeah, they are regularly found. If we talk about new infections in dry period, then it's mainly Streptococcus ubris and Escherichia coli. And of course, Strep ubris nowadays in many countries, it's also the most predominant bacteria in lactation. But in dry cow periods, it are the environmental ones. That's why internal teat sealant is important, hygiene is important, good teeth in condition. So everything to make sure or to reduce the risk that those environmental pathogens can penetrate in the udder during dry periods. Yeah.
Okay.
And the Staph aureus and the Strep agalaxiae that you mentioned, if you have this in the herd, it's more like a milking cow problem. It has nothing to do with the dry cow period. It's
no,
more like
but
contagious.
but the problem is a bit that they might make it more difficult to differentiate infected from non-infected cows, especially based on the cell count.
Exactly.
And even if you just have a single milk sampling for culturing, you might miss some of them. And we need to be honest, if there was not a discussion on antimicrobial use, dry cow therapy would still be used, because we know it's very effective in curing animals. So it's better to first make sure, because otherwise it will only become worse. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There was a question from Katarzyna on Staphylococcus in the herd, also candidate for selective dry cow therapy, but I think you answered now in the presentation. Okay.
Yeah, but if you are talking about non-aureus staphylococci in our study, if we actually, those cows, you can also see them as non-infected. There is a good spontaneous cure over dry periods. Yeah, but Staph aureus, that's another story.
Yeah. Another question from Sonka. What do you think about selective treatment for every quarter? For example, just use antibiotic in 1 quarter.
Yes, that's also possible. The effect on antibiotic use is, let's say, quite limited. If you have high cell count cows and then you select quarters based on CMT testing, for example, the California mastitis test, then you will have a bit more reduction in antimicrobial use without increasing the risk of infections. So a study is available on that. But on the other hand, you have to take into account the work, the logistics for the farmer, and that does not in my opinion, it does not outweigh the little less, the little more reduction that you have in antimicrobial use to do the work, the CMT testing, and the farmer needs to remember afterwards, a cow got antibiotics, yes or no, but 1 quarter of a cow got antibiotics, that might make it tricky as well for antimicrobial residues after calving as well. It's at 2 months or 6 weeks in between, so he needs an excellent recording then. So it's possible, and you will have a little increase or a little more reduction in antimicrobial use, but it's something to really discuss well with the farmer if he is willing to do that.
But what is the risk, Sophie? Because after 8 weeks, she started milking the cow, and 1 quarter is then the milk has to be withdrawn. But that's in most countries, there's a rule for 2 days or 3 days milk withdrawal anyway. So I don't see a bigger risk than another cow treated, or.
Yeah, but I would definitely test it because the 2 days is maybe the rule, but I would not trust it. And we are even not sure that, well, we know that in some cases the quarters are not independent. So it's even possible that there might have been some distribution to the other quarters. Yeah.
Okay.
There were also other questions about the economic comparison between use and not use of antibiotics versus trichotherapy strategy. But I think you talked about it, Sophie, already.
Yeah. Yes, I think the most important is to have a good udder health. And then that's a study of Christian Scherpezeel. Then you see that the dry cow strategy has not a huge impact on the economic benefits or the economic results of the farm. But on farms with already a bad udder health, then even if you start, I don't know it by heart, but even if you only have 20% of the cows dried off with antibiotics, you immediately see that the costs are increasing. So it really starts with having a good udder health at the herd level.
Yeah. We had also a question about the threshold of 150,000 for primiparous cows, despite level is 100,000 defined by IDF. But you talk quite well about threshold. There's many different thresholds and not only one, which is
no, there is not only
standard.
one. It's just that they have found, like you explained in that study, that it's the best balance between reducing antimicrobial use as much as possible and not increasing the risk too much of having extra clinical mastitis or cell counts after calving. And why is it higher in heifers in the Netherlands than in adult cows? Because there they count also that heifers have a better immunity. So if you miss a cow, if for example, a heifer has 140,000 cells per mil and she's infected, then you have a higher chance that she will still cure because of the better immunity. But it's an endless discussion. Thresholds also for detection, also in lactation. That's something that we know. Even the 100,000, you might have animals that you will still, if you use 100,000, a lot of animals will be dried off with antibiotics, although they don't need them. So.
Sure. So maybe the last one, because we are out of time. Why is it important to start the dipping from the left front?
I don't know. That's important.
I think it depends on where you're standing. But if you're standing on the left side, I would not start with the left front, because then you will be dipped yourself, your arm, because it will start dripping. So then I would start on the right side,
Oh, yeah,
and then
yeah.
come to the left side. So I think it depends where you're standing. In efficacy, it will probably not make that difference. Of course, if you're on the left side and you start dipping on the left side and you remove already the disinfection product with your arm, yeah, then it will not be very
keep your arm
effective.
clean. Keep your arm clean is the main
clean,
reason.
I think that's
you
the main.
start with the furthest to
Yeah.
go to the nearest, whatever you stand.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we will be able to answer everything because we're running out of time. So it's time to thank everybody for having listened to our speakers. You've been quite a lot tonight, and we are very happy with that. And we'll stay tuned to the website.
Yeah, we have the next date already for the next show. It will be in September, I think. We have 2 more coming, guys. So
where you can find all the information, and the next webinar will be in end of September on the 28th, but we will bring the information soon. So thank you, everybody. We wish you a very nice evening, and thanks again to Joep and Sophie for having presenting.
yes, thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Sophie.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, everybody. European vets, go for it, guys. Do the good things and advise on cuddle boxes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.